I used to be a person with social anxiety, but somehow I ended up with an outgoing daughter. One day, she unexpectedly mentioned a crush I had secretly held for years, saying, "Uncle, my mom kisses your picture every night until it's almost worn out. You should think of yourself as my dad." Adrian Morrison looked at me, his expression serious, as though he could see through something I couldn't. I felt a wave of tension, wanting to flee, but he held the back of my neck gently and asked, "All these years? Did you know I was back?" Suddenly, the doorbell rang. Groggy, I stumbled out of bed to answer, only for a tall, heavily intoxicated man to barge in. His voice was low and somewhat melancholy. "Didn't you say you'd come tonight, Adrian? I'm feeling a little dizzy." Wasn't he supposed to confess his love tonight? He didn't give me time to react. It all happened so quickly. The next morning, around dawn, I woke up feeling stuffy, as though I were being held down. My body felt warm and my mind was buzzing. I could still sense his breath near my ear, faint like smoke. When I opened my eyes, I saw Adrian's handsome face inches away, and I gasped, my thoughts racing. Slowly, my limbs started to move. When I managed to free myself from his embrace, I hurried to leave, only to trip. My luck was terrible, and the pain almost made me cry. Still, I gritted my teeth and stayed silent, quickly dressing. Though my waist ached, my back hurt, and my legs cramped. I couldn't help but curse Adrian under my breath. Once dressed, I saw red marks on my skin in the mirror that my collar couldn't cover. I cursed him again. Looking at Adrian sleeping soundly, likely due to the alcohol, I noticed the blanket had slipped down, revealing his muscular, smooth skin. I bent to cover him, and that's when I saw small marks on his neck. My face flushed, and I reached out to touch them, realizing they wouldn't fade. Adrian stirred at my touch. Meanwhile, my application for studying abroad had been approved, and I grabbed the luggage I'd packed the day before. The journey was smooth, and as we neared the airport, I stared out at the tree shadows, not daring to think of anything. 5 years later, I found myself in a small restaurant. A child at the next table was crying loudly, and everyone around seemed bothered, except for the mother who was absorbed in her phone. I felt a bit frustrated about recent comic copyright issues, but didn't dare to speak up. Suddenly, a child next to me yelled over my daughter's cries, "Hey, little guy, stop crying. Auntie, take care of him or give him a good smack." I quickly covered Phoebe's mouth, startled by the commotion. The other patrons laughed, and the mother shot me an angry glare before leaving with her child. I sighed with relief and gently told Phoebe, "Hurry and eat." Not long after, Phoebe loudly asked, "Uncle, why are you smoking? Don't you have any manners?" My heart raced, and I turned to see a large man glaring at me. I smiled awkwardly and apologized, quickly picking up Phoebe and leaving, not caring if she finished her meal. Just as I was about to exit, she shouted again, "Uncle, don't smoke. You'll get lung cancer." I rushed away, worried he might follow us to scold us both. As a mother with social anxiety, I often wonder what it's like to have a daughter as outgoing as Phoebe. I'm always nervous, ready to say, "Whose child is this?" I'm not really familiar with her. When she misbehaves, I try to explain, "Uncle is very strong, and Mom is just a bit afraid of being hit." She responds, "We can call the police." To which I reply, "But what if Mom gets hurt badly?" Her imagination runs wild, mentioning things like contacting the crematorium or the insurance company. I try to calm her, saying, "Please talk a bit less. I don't understand all of that." Adrian, with his quirks and endless chatter, still surprises me. When we arrived at the Prosperity Building, it was bustling. I set Phoebe down, holding her hand tightly. She looked at me like an adult, telling me, "Don't be nervous." I replied, "I'm just worried you'll get lost." She pouted but didn't argue, leading me to an empty elevator. As I followed, I opened my phone to check the address, realizing I was terrible with directions. At that moment, I heard footsteps approaching. I turned around to see Adrian standing amidst a crowd of people. He wore a black suit, blending in yet exuding a strong presence that captured the attention of many. I froze for a moment, then quickly lowered my gaze, telling myself, "I will blend in. I will disappear. No one will notice me. No one will notice me." His vision isn't great. His vision isn't great. Time dragged on slowly and nothing happened. Just when I thought my wish might come true, a child's voice suddenly cut through the air like a clap of thunder on a clear day. Mom, look, that handsome uncle looks like your phone wallpaper. I didn't dare to turn around, but after a few seconds, a familiar voice reached my ears. Kelsey, he said, his tone firm as though he were stating a fact. His voice was soft, yet carried a hint of depth, sounding warm like a cello. Though I couldn't read his feelings, it made my heart tighten. I froze, turning awkwardly to face him. Long time no see, he said, smiling faintly, but there was no warmth in his eyes. I didn't expect you to remember me, I replied with an awkward laugh. Just then, the elevator door opened and I pulled Phoebe inside. Adrian followed closely behind. I hoped the presence of more people would ease the awkwardness, but once the door closed, it was just the three of us. Now, the discomfort only grew. Neither of us pressed the button for our floor, so the elevator continued its ascent. I hurriedly took out my phone, frantically scrolling and editing the chat records. Which floor is it on anyway? I felt uneasy, but my eyes caught sight of Phoebe and Adrian, who both seemed increasingly relaxed. The little girl kept glancing at him, and Adrian was doing the same. Then, he pulled out a piece of candy from his pocket, and Phoebe's face lit up like a child. Without hesitation, she reached for the candy. I pretended to be stern and told her, Phoebe, you should be polite when an uncle gives you candy. What else should you say? She hesitated, glancing from me to Adrian. I awkwardly said to Adrian, Handsome uncle, is there any more? My mom wants some too. I couldn't help but blush. Adrian chuckled, and I thought, I really can't control this child. I lowered my head again, irritated, tapping at my phone screen. When Phoebe came back, she was eating the candy and still didn't plan to return to my side. Reluctantly, I glanced up and saw her holding Adrian's hand. Oh no, this is frustrating. Phoebe, let go of me. Do you realize I haven't had the chance to hold your hand for over 10 years? What drove me crazy was how she started chatting softly with Adrian, saying, Handsome uncle, I want to tell you something. My mom kisses your picture every night, and that spot is almost worn out. Don't be shy, just say it. You can think of me as your dad. Adrian looked at me with a deep gaze, as if there were some unspoken understanding between us. I froze. Phoebe, today either you or I will learn a lesson. If I leave without teaching you one, I won't believe it. Adrian muttered to me. He had been watching me intently, and his gaze made me uneasy. When the elevator doors opened, I didn't think much of it and was about to sneak out. But suddenly, Adrian grabbed me by the neck and whispered, After all these years, you know it's time to come back, right? I was so nervous I couldn't speak. As the doors were about to close, Adrian reached out to stop them and pulled me back in. He also grabbed Phoebe by the hand and led her out with us. We're not going to this floor, he said. You're on the chairman's private elevator. It doesn't go to other floors. He led me away. Follow me, he added lightly. So that's why no one else is here. Adrian took off his suit jacket and handed Phoebe a box of milk. She smiled up at me, and I shot her a warning glance, signaling her to be quiet. The copyright case regarding the stars and moon was handled by the lawyer I hired. It suddenly occurred to me. But didn't you say this was the chairman's office? I was interrupted by his calm glance. He muttered, clearly unbothered. I sat nervously on the sofa, not daring to ask again. Adrian adjusted his tie, adopting a serious expression. All right, let's talk about your issue. I nodded quickly, still anxious. It's about the more than 300 original drawings I have, I started. But before I could finish, he interrupted me again. Is this your daughter? Why didn't you call me when you got married? His tone was colder now, his lips pressed tightly together. His words made me feel guilty, and I stammered, unsure how to explain, feeling flustered. Phoebe, sitting beside me, took a sip of milk and nonchalantly said, Handsome uncle, don't be mad. She didn't invite me either. Adrian's expression remained unchanged, sharp and intense. What did she mean by that? Are you trying to betray me? I was still thinking of how to answer when Phoebe raised her hand and asked, "Handsome uncle, what is betrayal?" Adrian's lips tightened slightly as he answered seriously, "It's when you let your mom be with me." Phoebe nodded, half understanding, then turned to look at me seriously and asked, "Mom, are you going to cheat?" Adrian tapped the table, seemingly indifferent. "I want to know too." I was stunned, and he urged, "Come on, hurry up and speak." Seeing that I was distracted, he impatiently tapped the table again. I nodded nervously. His face immediately darkened. "Kelsey Mitchell, what makes you think I, Adrian, would lower myself to be your third party?" I was so frightened, I quickly shook my head. No, it's not like that." But my denial didn't help. Adrian's expression grew darker, and he asked, "So you mean I'm not even qualified to be your mistress?" I felt on the verge of tears, realizing that no matter what I said, I had already said something wrong. I started to feel a bit lightheaded and hurriedly looked around for Phoebe, only to find her lying on the windowsill, staring at the distant Ferris wheel. I forced a smile and said, "Let's focus on the case then. It's really tough to make money these days with all the piracy going on in the market, and we're struggling at home." Phoebe was an unexpected source of pity, but Adrian still stood with his arms crossed, staring at me, clearly signaling that I should stay on topic. I quickly raised my voice and said, "Our family is so poor we can't even afford enough to eat, right?" Phoebe, hearing her name, immediately turned around, and when she realized the situation, she put on a pitiful look like a puppy, saying, "Mom, I'm hungry." With Phoebe as a witness, my credibility instantly improved, and Adrian didn't push the topic further. "How about her father?" Adrian paused for a moment, as if hesitant to speak. "Your husband, huh?" I thought to myself. As expected, once you start digging, one problem leads to another. I was so nervous I could feel sweat forming. "He hasn't earned anything," I said. Adrian smiled faintly, letting out a soft laugh, but his tone was cold and serious. "So, what do you think is so great about him?" I carefully looked up, avoiding his gaze, and hesitantly responded, "His looks," though I knew it was a shallow answer. Adrian's voice turned ice cold, and the atmosphere grew tense. After a long silence, he asked, "Is that all you care about?" I pressed my lips together, quickly taking a look at him, then lowered my head again, thinking over his figure. The sound of documents being slammed onto the table broke the silence, and Adrian's tone shifted abruptly to a colder one. "Back to the issue of copyright infringement," he said. "According to Article 217 of the criminal law, if it's for profit, there are numerous cases of infringement. Please clarify which category you fall into. Also, when did you first discover it? Give me a specific date, and did you keep any evidence? How much is the loss, approximately? Can you provide an estimate? Lastly, do you agree to settle privately?" These legal terms left me feeling confused, and my thoughts started to drift. The sunlight coming through the window was beautiful, highlighting Adrian's sharp profile. His eyes, dark as ink with a hint of mist, were difficult to read, but a gentle glow seemed to surround him, much like before. I felt a warmth inside me as my heart raced. Adrian seemed to notice, leaning in closer, his voice low and tense. "So, Miss Mitchell, is this how you look at me because you think my face is nice?" His intensity made me anxious, so I cautiously raised my hand, ready to answer. But Adrian immediately cut me off, calling me Adrian Lawyer. I quickly corrected myself. "Oh, Adrian Lawyer, could you please speak a bit slower?" He responded, slightly sneering. "Can you afford a lawyer who speaks slower?" "The average fee is around $100,000. I didn't respond further. Adrian told me to collect evidence and monitor the piracy websites, organizing the links as needed. Being someone with social anxiety, I preferred staying at home, so I mentioned to Adrian that I could do this work from there. He disagreed, assuming I'd be lazy. Left with no choice, I had to keep carrying my computer to the top floor of the building. That day, as I entered, I found Adrian sitting in a chair, leaning back, looking unwell. Phoebe immediately ran over, her voice filled with concern. "Handsome uncle, what's wrong with you?" I hurried over as well. Seeing his condition, I quickly pulled out some crystal candies from my pocket, opened one, and offered it to him. Adrian had low blood sugar and always carried candies with him. Back in college, despite his cold and serious image as a top student, he would often pull out blue and pink crystal candies. This contrast made him especially popular with girls. Of course, I was one of them. Later, I found out it was due to low blood sugar caused by anorexia, and it made me feel sad. I spent a lot of time learning how to cook for him. After eating the candy, Adrian's condition improved slightly, though he continued to grip the blue wrapper tightly, saying nothing. After a long pause, he finally spoke. "You don't have to do this." I was busy with my computer, and hearing him, I was momentarily confused. I thought he was just being polite, so I casually responded, "It's fine. You gave candy to Phoebe last time, so this is just me repaying you." Adrian's mouth twitched awkwardly, and Phoebe rolled her eyes at me. I wondered, did I say something wrong? For the rest of the day, Adrian remained cold toward me, making me feel uncomfortable until it grew dark. Finally, Adrian, lawyer, said we could finish. I rubbed my shoulders, pulling Phoebe along, feeling a bit confused. Is this how it is for everyone in court? Once outside the company, the air had a damp smell, and the sky was overcast, signaling rain. I hurried to grab a taxi, but it was difficult to find one. All the taxis were occupied, and even the DD app had long waits. We had to wait for 40 or 50 cars. After finally finding a bus stop, we couldn't get on any buses either. I considered taking the subway, but by then it had started raining heavily, and it was already dark. Phoebe seemed scared, so I crouched down and held her tightly. We huddled together in the corner of the bus stop, trying to avoid the rain. Don't worry, the city is safe now. There are no bad people around. Phoebe sniffled, her eyes welling with tears. "Mom, I'm scared." Just as I was about to comfort my little one, she unexpectedly added, "Mom, the man in the yellow shirt left the fried chicken downstairs. I'm afraid someone will steal our food if we're too late." I rubbed my forehead, feeling a little helpless. Just then, a black Maybach car pulled over and honked twice. The window slowly rolled down, revealing Adrian's flawless face even in the heavy rain. "Why didn't your husband come to pick you up?" His voice was calm but clear, despite the rain. I felt a bit uncomfortable, but there was no other choice. "Get in the car," he said. "This parking ticket is a 200 fine." Without hesitation, I quickly scooped Phoebe up and placed her in the car before sitting beside her. "Thank you, Adrian, lawyer," I said. He didn't respond directly, but spoke softly. "If I were a husband, I would never let my wife and child get caught in the rain." His voice sounded distant, almost as if a fog separated us. I noticed a few muddy stains on the new white blanket at my feet. They stood out against the clean fabric, making me feel uneasy. "Kelsey, can you focus?" I suddenly looked up, meeting Adrian's deep eyes in the rearview mirror. They seemed to peer into me, but I just heard myself say nothing. Adrian remained silent, and Phoebe soon fell asleep in my arms. The surroundings were quiet, but a weight hung over me. I kept thinking about the mud stains under my feet. The car eventually stopped, signaling we had reached home. I got out, still focused on the carpet, and just as I was about to speak, Adrian stepped out of the car and walked toward me. "What's wrong?" he asked. At that moment, Phoebe woke up and sweetly said, "Uncle, you've worked hard. Come to my house for a while. I'll treat you to Wangai milk." I was taken aback and quickly covered her mouth. "All right, forget it. He's over there. It's not really appropriate," we both said at the same time. The air became cold. After a brief silence, Adrian chuckled softly. "He's just an old classmate. We don't have anything special between us." As Adrian turned to head upstairs, I grabbed his arm. "No, you can't go." He looked at me, puzzled. I quickly explained, "He's very fierce, rude to people, and prone to violence." Adrian's face turned serious. "Has he hit you?" he asked, his voice sharp. I felt nervous and quietly lowered my head. "You really shouldn't go up there." Adrian grew angry, his expression hardening. "Kelsey, why are you being so irrational?" he demanded. I said nothing, which only annoyed him more. He turned cold and went back to the car, slamming the door shut and speeding off. Phoebe, now fully awake, rubbed her face and asked in confusion, "Mom, why did you want the handsome uncle to think there are other people in our family?" I pretended to answer seriously. "The handsome uncle is a lawyer. If he finds out any clues, he might take you away." Phoebe looked puzzled and asked, "Then why don't you just be together?" I sighed and replied, "What do you know, little one? The divorce rate is very high now. Besides, my handsome uncle is a lawyer. What if he wants to fight for your custody?" Phoebe thought for a while before finally saying, "Mom, you don't do much every day, but you sure think a lot." Her words struck a nerve, and I felt a surge of anger. As we reached the corner downstairs, Adrian said coldly, "Look, your takeout isn't lost, but it's been soaked, so it can't be eaten." Phoebe immediately started crying, and I felt a slight shift in my mood. What I truly wanted to express was that the kind of love hidden deep inside the heart is so fragile, it doesn't dare to be touched. Things that can't be obtained can't be lost, and without hope, one cannot truly feel despair. The next morning, I looked in the mirror and saw dark circles under my eyes, which irritated me. I awkwardly applied makeup, hoping to cover them up so no one would notice. However, my makeup skills weren't great. As soon as I arrived at the office, Adrian stared at me. Finally, he asked, "Did he hit you?" I felt embarrassed and quickly shook my head. No, it's a bit complicated to explain. To make it clear, I continued, it was because of the little girl yesterday afternoon. She napped at the office all day, and when we got home at night, she didn't want to sleep. She insisted on watching TV and refused to watch The Pink Little Pig. She wanted to watch horror movies instead. She ended up falling asleep while watching, which scared me so much that I couldn't sleep well all night. I felt embarrassed to bring this up with Adrian, so I let him handle it himself. As I sat at the computer, I glanced at Adrian and noticed that his face was serious. The more I looked, the sleepier I became. My eyelids grew heavy, and before I knew it, I had fallen asleep, my head resting on the computer. When I woke up, I rubbed my neck and noticed that a suit jacket had fallen to the floor. I quickly picked it up and stole a glance at Adrian. I exhaled deeply, feeling relieved. Thankfully, he hadn't noticed me. After all, he's quite meticulous. I stood up and stretched lazily. Not far from me, Adrian, tall and slender, was standing by the microwave, while Phoebe was excitedly standing on her toes, gazing eagerly at her lunchbox. As soon as they heard my voice, they both turned to look at me. To ease the tension, I felt a little embarrassed and cleared my throat. "Phoebe, did you finish your kindergarten homework?" I asked. Phoebe hummed in response, her face turning red. "I forgot how much homework there was. I have a picture of it on my phone. Mom, I'll go to the restroom first," she said. I yawned, thinking about washing my face to wake myself up. But before I could do that, something suddenly clicked in my mind. I quickly dashed out, shouting, "Put down my phone." It was too late. Adrian had already focused on my phone. The little girl beside him exclaimed, "There are so many pictures of handsome uncles." No, they were handsome even back then. I felt my face burning with embarrassment, my ears growing hot. I quickly snatched my phone back and rushed to the bathroom. There, I took several deep breaths, urging myself to stay calm. Finally, I walked out, and it was as if nothing had happened. When I returned, I saw Phoebe holding the bent toe I had made when I woke up that morning. The colors, aroma, and taste were still present. In front of Adrian was a lonely takeout, and he was eating very slowly while reading the financial newspaper. Eventually, he set down his chopsticks, having eaten only a few bites of vegetables. I felt a little sorry for him, so I suggested, "How about I bring you a portion tomorrow?" Adrian nodded, seemingly expecting me to say that. Phoebe glanced at the food Adrian hadn't finished and said somewhat disapprovingly, "Uncle, it's not good to be picky." Perhaps because the girl hadn't called Adrian handsome this time, I noticed a slight disappointment in his demeanor. He reluctantly picked up his chopsticks again, but seemed unsure how to continue eating. The girl, sensing this, picked up her small spoon and said, "Handsome uncle, this is my mom's special treat." "Phoebe, don't misunderstand," I quickly added. "That's just a heartfelt omelet my mom made." Adrian didn't seem to mind and smiled slightly. "Thank you, Phoebe. I'll accept it." I thought the matter was resolved then, but unexpectedly that night, my WeChat notification went off. It was Adrian's alternate account. He hadn't posted anything in a while, and I was curious to see what he would say. I clicked on it, and to my surprise, I saw a sentence he wouldn't normally say. Only the unloved are the third party. This line was open to interpretation, and I spent the whole night thinking about it. Eventually, I decided not to overthink it. The next day, I wore some unusual makeup and went to the office. Adrian looked at me coldly and said, "There's a regular meeting today. Let's have dinner together tonight. I need to discuss something with you." I nodded and sent a message to the teacher, planning to report the small cafeteria management to Phoebe for tonight. This little girl always talked about wanting to eat with her friends, so this plan would make her happy. The office was spacious and bright, and without Adrian around, it felt much more relaxed. I lazily curled up on the sofa with a notebook, soon finishing today's work. During my free time, I thought about the characters and plot for the new comic. Suddenly, a woman entered without knocking. Her expression changed drastically when she saw me. "It's you again. This never ends," she said. I immediately stood up, but she suddenly smiled, her grin full of disdain. She slowly walked toward me. What a skilled wrist to be able to come straight here. 5 years abroad, and you still only know how to play the victim. Really, it's like you were raised without a mother. Her words pierced my heart like needles, leaving me feeling extremely cold. I wanted to speak, but my words wouldn't come. I wanted to run, but my body was frozen in place. My heart had already long hidden itself, just like it had 5 years ago, when all the malice I faced over the years had made me want to escape. Trinity Watson smiled, looking especially pleased, and pretended to seriously pick up the original painting I'd worked so hard on. My heart tightened instinctively, and I wanted to snatch it back, but she tore the painting instantly. "Don't bother him anymore, Kelsey," she said. "We're about to get engaged." She dialed the internal phone and spoke coldly. "Secretary Lee, please escort these irrelevant people out." "No need. I can do it myself," I replied quickly, wanting to leave. But she stopped me. "Wait a minute. Take your trash with you," she sneered, pointing at the painting on the floor. My sense of humiliation reached its peak. Trinity smirked and added, "Just kidding. Go ahead. I'll call someone to clean it up." At that moment, Secretary Lee walked in and paused when he saw me. "What happened?" he asked. I didn't answer, just walking quickly out. When I reached the stairs, I slowed down, took a few deep breaths, and my body finally stopped shaking. I grew up in an orphanage, and during that time, I was bullied by many people, especially girls like Trinity. I couldn't fight back, and no one ever supported me. Over time, I developed a tendency to avoid confrontations as I grew older. I knew something was wrong, but the fear inside me couldn't be shaken. I slumped into a corner, my head buried in my hands, trying to distract myself with my phone. It was then that I noticed a message from the editor earlier, mentioning the legal department on the 32nd floor of the Prosperity Building. I made my way down the stairs, one floor at a time, and gradually, my nerves calmed. As I entered, I found a bright, orderly space with "Legal Department" boldly displayed on the wall. The area was buzzing with activity. People were busy with their tasks, and no one seemed to notice me, which made me feel a little more comfortable. After scanning the room, I spotted a young lawyer who didn't appear to be occupied. I approached him carefully. "Excuse me, I'd like to know how much it typically costs to file an infringement lawsuit," I asked. "Do you have an appointment?" he responded. "Although I'm just an intern, I'd be happy to assist," the young man offered, flashing a warm smile. He explained the process with patience and professionalism. As I listened, I became more engaged, understanding the whole case better. By the end of our conversation, I felt much more at ease and happy. "You're definitely going to be an excellent lawyer one day," I said, smiling in encouragement. Just then, I heard a voice from behind. "Why not wait for him to become a permanent employee in 3 months before taking your case?" My body tensed, but the intern's eyes lit up, and he looked at me with admiration. "Law is always more than what we read in books. The example you gave was not very fitting. I recommend you check out Kenway's approach to criminal law case analysis." The intern quickly nodded, acknowledging the advice. Adrian then looked at me, his tone detached. Are you dissatisfied with me being your lawyer? I didn't reply, but Trinity's words flashed in my mind. Adrian cares for stray dogs on the street, let alone you, an orphan. I'm just buying a few of your paintings. Why are you so excited about it? You're so easily deceived. He really feels sorry for you. After I finish this, I'll go pick up Phoebe and we'll return to the cafeteria for a kids' meal together. As I thought about her words, I felt a pang of realization. My feelings for Adrian hadn't truly gone away, even though I knew deep down that I wasn't good enough for him. I still wanted him. I couldn't bring myself to delete the pictures of him, and jealousy would occasionally rise within me, uncontrollable. Yet, once this lawsuit was over, I knew we would part ways. That was fine. I had Phoebe now, and I would wish Adrian well. However, things don't always go as planned. I returned home with Phoebe and we slowly walked up the stairs. At the top, we saw a tall figure standing, cigarette in hand, the smoke swirling in the dark. He heard us and turned to look, then stubbed out his cigarette. Phoebe joyfully shouted, "Handsome, Uncle." Adrian gave a nod in acknowledgement. I took out the key to unlock the door and Phoebe dashed inside. Just as I was about to follow, I suddenly felt someone grab my arm and pull me into an embrace. He then turned me toward him and pressed me against the door. The motion-activated light flickered on, and I saw Adrian's deep, dark eyes. The silence around us felt suffocating, and I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears. The light went out again, and the air around us became calm and intense. Adrian gently held my neck, his voice a bit hard to interpret. "Kelsey," he said. I replied softly, like a helpless lamb. "Aha, you stood me up again?" His voice was low, almost restrained. "Don't you have anything to say?" He stared at me, and I felt my throat tighten. So many things ran through my mind, but in the end, I blurted out, "A cigarette butt is fine. 50. Can you pick it up first?" Adrian seemed at a loss for words. After a pause, he bent down with a sigh and picked up the cigarette butt. I reached out to take it, but to my surprise, he placed it in his own pocket. "Don't change the subject," he said. "Forget it. I'll just say this directly. I can help you with the divorce case, and I won't charge you a cent. I'll ensure your safety and make sure that man has nothing." Adrian paused, and I felt his hand warm against me. "I'll be with you," he continued, his words a little unclear. "What he has, I also have. Looks, body." I wasn't sure if I fully understood. Maybe his voice was too persuasive, and it left me confused. I tried to speak, calling his name. "What's wrong, Adrian?" I asked. "It's nothing," he replied, his voice a bit softer. I swallowed hard. I don't want a divorce. Adrian's face turned red with anger at my response, and his body trembled slightly. "Kelsey, are you crazy? That man is someone who only knows how to enjoy life without making money. What's so special about him that you're so devoted? I'm really foolish for neglecting you. Yet here you are, seeking me out again. And since you've already chosen him, why do you still keep my photos on your phone? Aren't you supposed to be filing for a divorce today?" He paused and then added, "I hope I don't hear news of you getting seriously hurt and wanting to file a criminal lawsuit." I was stunned. This was the first time in the 10 years I had known Adrian that he had said something like that. I had never seen him so furious before. I was a bit confused, but his anger was clear. "Stop pretending," he said coldly. "You've been hiding behind makeup for days." I felt lost, unsure how to respond. "There's no need to explain yourself to me," he continued. "I'm just being overly sentimental. Your problems have nothing to do with me. Even though I'm not married, I have my limits too. A cornered animal will fight back." Unable to hold back, I raised my voice. "Aren't you also getting engaged to that beautiful girl, your first love? The feelings are strong. Why do you need to interfere in my life? I don't need your pity." Adrian was momentarily stunned. "Wait a minute, when did I say I was getting engaged?" he asked. I couldn't help but blurt out everything that was on my mind. "It's what Trinity said. She also said she's perfect in every way, that I don't deserve you. You say you're helping me, but it's just out of pity. You've never spoken as kindly as she did, but you're always so harsh with me." As I spoke, my voice softened. tinged with hurt, and it made me feel a bit embarrassed. The emotions surged, and I couldn't hold back the tears. Adrian saw me crying and immediately seemed flustered, rushing to wipe my tears. "You don't need to take her seriously," he said. I didn't raise my voice to her, and I honestly couldn't care less about her. "I'm strict with you because you're not behaving well. Don't feel sorry for yourself. It's just worry on my part." His words were direct, and I couldn't deny that I felt uneasy. Yet his confession also made my heart swell. "I worry about you at school, that you might get bullied, and now I have to worry about your comics and your family. If I hadn't stepped in, would you expect me to ignore such a small issue worth only tens of thousands? Now, do you understand how much I care about you?" I was a bit embarrassed by his honesty, and my heart felt full, though still uneasy. Adrian took a deep breath, his voice softening. "Your anger shows you care about me too, so let's be together, okay?" A smile involuntarily appeared on my face, and I nodded slightly. He then added, "After your divorce, I'll take good care of you and treat Phoebe like my own daughter." My smile instantly faded, and seeing my change in expression, Adrian's smile also disappeared. He looked at me patiently and asked, "Is there anything else?" I hesitated for a moment before gently raising my hand, speaking softly. "I mentioned it before. You can't hit me." Adrian's gaze sharpened, and after a moment of silence, he coldly said, "Say it." I leaned against the door, my heart racing, trying to cover up my emotions. "I can't get a divorce," I said quietly. "Why?" he asked. "Because I'm not even married." The moment I spoke, Adrian's face darkened and anger flashed in his eyes. He looked at me as though he expected me to collapse. "Do you love that man so much?" he demanded. I was hesitant, unsure how to answer. I wondered whether making him angry twice tonight would lead to something else. But Adrian didn't give me any time to think. "Who is this man? Don't make me find out." I lowered my head, clenching my teeth, then bluntly said, "It's yours." There was a long silence before I heard him murmur, "So it wasn't a dream." A surge of emotion flickered in Adrian's eyes, something indescribable. "Then let's get married." "Are you joking?" I asked, surprised. Adrian shook his head, his expression serious. "We've already lost 5 years." The room went quiet again as he continued. "I think we both need to calm down." A voice from the other side interrupted, asking for a timeline. Adrian responded, "I don't know. Not before the court hearing next week." I couldn't understand why the usually composed Adrian was acting so impulsively, but I didn't want him to propose because of Phoebe. I worried he might regret it later. Besides, marriage wasn't just about two people. It involved two families, and Adrian came from a wealthy family who might never accept me. I scribbled absent-mindedly on a piece of paper, lost in thought. Suddenly, I heard footsteps outside the door. Since the last time with Trinity, Adrian had been absent, leaving me alone on the carpet in the corner, doodling. I could see who entered first. A middle-aged man stepped in, looking very much like Adrian. He must be the chairman. He glanced around and finally spotted me. As an elder, I quickly stood and walked over to him. "Is there something I can help you with?" I asked. "Please have a seat." He sat on the nearby sofa, his expression serious. Based on his usual approach, I expected him to hand me a check and ask me to leave his son. I sat carefully, thinking about how much the check might be and how I would handle it. If I could stay home as a recluse and still support Phoebe, it would be ideal. But to my surprise, the first thing he said was, "When are you planning to get married?" "What should we do? Where should we hold the wedding? We should at least discuss it first." I swallowed hard, trying to collect my thoughts. "I don't have parents, and we're not even sure if we'll get married. I might not be worthy of your son." The chairman snorted in disbelief. "So you must be Kelsey. I'm surprised you know me." "I didn't really want to get to know you," the chairman responded. Then his tone turned serious. "My son Adrian is truly remarkable. He has never asked me for anything." His voice grew louder. "But that year you left without a word. He actually asked me to help find you. That's my fault, I was wrong." Instinctively, I apologized, but he frowned at me. Why are you so frightened, like a little rabbit? His tone softened considerably. Trinity knew I was looking into things, so she came to find me and said some harsh things. She mentioned that you dropped out, that you're unmarried and pregnant and now working as a waitress in a restaurant. At the time, I thought to myself, how could my son lower himself to seek someone like you? I told him from the beginning that it wouldn't work, but he drank for a whole week and ended up with a stomach bleed. I thought he'd get over it, but he never forgot you. I've been keeping an eye on you, and I put your lawsuit on his desk. Please forgive me. After working my whole life, I don't want my son to be deceived. I really hadn't expected things to turn out like this. I never imagined it would come to this point. However, I heard the chairman say, you need to clear things up quickly. Everyone's speculating about whether he's in poor health. Some CEOs even joked about it, wondering if he likes men. The chairman slammed the table in frustration, and I couldn't help but feel my face turn red. I could only nod in response. Grandpa, you're here too? Phoebe cried out excitedly as soon as she saw the chairman. She ran over, rummaging through her little backpack as if to show off, then handed him a piece of paper. Grandpa, here's my perfect score report card. You promised to take me for chicken. The chairman's face lit up with a big smile, and he immediately stood up saying, let's go, let's go. Grandpa can buy out the whole store for you. He had initially planned to refuse, but I whispered, drink less cola, as we reached the door. The chairman suddenly paused and turned to me. Kelsey, you two should discuss things properly and let us know when you've made a decision. I nodded slowly. Just then, Adrian entered and asked, what's going on? My ears burned, and I felt a bit embarrassed to speak. I glanced at the document in his hand, which had appraisal report written on it. I felt awkward and didn't want to engage anymore, so I angrily retreated to my corner. You ask me but don't believe me. Then why even ask in the first place? Adrian seemed to sense something was off and walked over to me. Are you upset about this? It was done by the old man, not me. The old man said if we don't do the appraisal, how can we inherit this billion-dollar estate? The words almost made me cry, and in a low voice, I excitedly said, can I do this appraisal? Maybe I'm the child, but Uncle lost. Adrian frowned immediately, calling out my name. Kelsey. I smiled at him, but he became serious. After a while, we both asked at the same time, have you made up your mind? Let's get married. Kelsey is an art student from a humble background, encouraged by her mother, a director, since childhood. She has always had a deep passion for painting, which transports her to another world. However, every time she buys watercolor paper, brushes, and paints, it takes up most of her living expenses. One day, during her senior year of high school, the shop owner where she worked disappeared, and for half a month, Kelsey could only eat steamed buns and pickles, eventually fainting from low blood sugar. The one who took her to the infirmary was Adrian, the heartthrob of the school at the time. Later, while waiting for a bus, Adrian asked the driver to stop, and Kelsey nervously climbed into the car. His voice, as beautiful as a cello, said, your paintings are really good. Can you sell me a few? I'd like to collect them. At that moment, Kelsey's heart quietly raced, and the money from those paintings helped her continue her studies. His words gave her rare encouragement. However, at a party thrown by Adrian, Trinity tore up Kelsey's painting in front of everyone. It was her proudest work, and everyone laughed at her, saying her feelings were disgusting. She felt frightened and ran off before Adrian could say anything. 5 years later, when Kelsey saw the painting in Adrian's study, it was surprisingly intact. She finally realized that the ticket from the other party was fake, but Kelsey couldn't understand why she acted as though it were real. 1 year later, the Watson Group made excessive profits from counterfeit cosmetics, leading to the chairman's imprisonment and the group's bankruptcy. I was suddenly pushed down, and she slipped away after being with me. After nearly a month of searching, I found out she went abroad and we lost contact. She's an orphan, which means she may never come back. Sometimes I wonder if I misjudged her. I thought she was a timid, innocent girl, but it turns out she's someone who plays with emotions. Usually she behaves well, promising to wait for me in a private room at night, but then she still slipped away. She's been through everything, yet she chose to leave directly. Truly, she deserves to be called a rabbit. Kelsey, very nice. During the time she was absent, I felt as though anyone could live a happy life. I didn't specifically wait for her. I went to numerous parties and didn't turn down anyone who asked to be my partner, but that was the extent of it. I think this is linked to my obsession with order. Once I commit to something, it's hard to change my mind. I would joke with my words, but secretly harbor resentment, all while still keeping an eye on her situation. There was no other option, so I turned to the old man for advice. He told me he couldn't find her. Anxious, I rushed back to my hometown, but all I heard at school was that she had dropped out. She had clearly come here to study painting, but she chose to leave instead. The teacher commented on how common it was for Chinese individuals to marry foreigners for a green card, and I thought to myself, if this keeps up, there's really no hope. By the fourth year, I couldn't hold it in anymore. I secretly wished she would notice my posts on Weibo, only to find out later that she followed a secondary account. My colleagues in the legal department thought I was a bit obsessive. On one hand, I loudly warned about national dangers on social media, and on the other, I always rushed to take cases related to the country. By the time I received the 16th case from the country, I often left my suitcase at the office. Just as I was about to ask my assistant to book a flight, I discovered a seemingly minor case about a comic copyright dispute. Kelsey. I felt a jolt of excitement and quickly turned to the client's photo. I couldn't resist gently touching it, smiling to myself as I realized she was still using her student ID photo at her age. Eventually, I met her in person. She was the same as before, always looking down as though she wanted to remain unnoticed. The little girl with her, however, was incredibly brave, staring at me with bright eyes and even secretly waving. The emotions were overwhelming, a complex mixture of bitterness, anger, and jealousy. This woman, Kelsey, truly stirs up all my feelings. She talks about wanting to cheat but claims she doesn't, praises her man's looks and physique, yet hides my photo on her phone. She feels sorry for me, says she'll make me lunch, yet refuses to divorce despite the domestic abuse. Sometimes, when I read the legal terms, dark thoughts cross my mind. I wonder how I could make that abusive man disappear without being caught, so that I could take care of this widow and her lovely daughter. I was almost figuring out how to do it when Kelsey told me she wasn't married. Inside, I felt torn, half love, half anger. But upon reflection, it was since the day she returned 5 years later that Adrian truly began living again.